Philippa, good to catch up with you again.
Thank you, Fifi.
Now, some would say that this is an ambitious plan.
It is an ambitious plan, but it is not unachievable.
It's essentially 100,000 jobs a year. How do you intend on doing this?
If we have a look at the maths to start off, it stacks up in terms of the fact that manufacturing currently provides 1.8 million jobs. Mm-hmm. So if you look at 5% growth on that over a 10-year period, that equates to 1 million jobs over the decade. And it's important to give this as a grounding, and then we can go into how we think we can do that. Because if we look at the quarter labour force statistics survey, in terms of what happened quarter 2 2016 to quarter 2 2017, we see that there were an additional 90,000 jobs created in manufacturing over the year. Mm-hmm. And that's in spite of quite difficult conditions. So at a high level, the maths stacks up. But to get into the detail as to how we can do it, we are advocating for 3 key areas. Mm-hmm. The first is that we need to boost aggregate demand. If we don't have sufficient demand, we can't manufacture product.
And that's the question that that's a statement that everybody's making, but no one seems to really know how to do it. I mean, we're facing a lot of headwinds. How does the manufacturing circle intend on trying to solve that problem?
We have 3 key areas which we think could make a difference. The first is to increase what we are manufacturing locally. Mm-hmm. We need to buy local. We need to partner with the Proudly South African campaign. Mm-hmm. On the government side, there's quite a lot happening in terms of public procurement, in terms of designation, where certain products or subsectors need to be manufactured locally. And similarly, private sector has a big role to play as well, to identify where there is an option to buy local. Let's rather do that. Then secondly, we need to look at what we can manufacture locally that's currently being imported. Mm-hmm. So we're looking at identifying the top 100 items that are imported, mm-hmm. understanding those value chains and seeing where we could actually substitute for local manufacture. And then the third thing is we need to become more export savvy, mm-hmm. and we need to grow our exports, and some of our members are already doing that. And there's so each of those we drill down into more recommendations. But on the demand side, we do feel there are these tangible, practical things that can be done, mm-hmm. and it just requires a lot of coordination. Mm-hmm. And then on the other hand, we also need to look at the supply side interventions, because to be competitive, we need to keep our costs down. So we need to reduce input costs. Energy is a very big issue in this area, and proposed tariff increases by Eskom for the new financial year is a big issue in that regard. From a fiscal policy point of view, we need to see where we can support our manufacturers to become more competitive, and we can level the playing fields in terms of what's happening elsewhere in the world. So various incentive schemes, for example, that mm-hmm. are provided are very important. And then on the labour side,
just to jump in there and just to go back onto the local buying local strategy. Yes. I mean, some may argue that a lot of our companies they're not as cost effective. In fact, in many industries, it's actually cheaper to import, even with the rand being weak, than it is to buy local. So how does the manufacturing sector respond to such concerns?
Well, it's got to do with identifying the greatest opportunities for enhancing value chains. In South Africa, we have the situation where we don't have huge economies of scale just in terms of the size of our population. So we're competing, for example, against a different country that might have different subsidies. And you're right, in some instances, it's cheaper to import something that's manufactured elsewhere than to manufacture locally. But we can't become a wasteland of imports. If we import everything, we're not going to create the jobs, to create the consumer markets, to be able to buy the product. So then it becomes a vicious downward spiral. So not every single item will be competitive, from a price point of view, but we need to identify where our strong, areas are and grow on those.
And some would argue a chicken. I know the chicken industry is very vexed at the imports that are coming through. But Philippa, just let's fix or address the supply issues. You're wanting to essentially deregulate or break down the monopoly in the energy sector. I mean, this is a big fight that many have tried to do. Many are wanting to, produce alternative energy sources, solar, other renewables, and they're not really making much headway because of the difficult spot that Eskom finds itself in. So how do you see yourselves making any progress in this fight?
Well, first of all, what we advocate for Eskom is what we advocate for manufacturers. If an organisation is not profitable, is experiencing revenue issues, then what one needs to do is actually reduce costs. So first of all, one needs to address, what a business model is at the utility point of view and how that can be improved. And then also to open up more opportunities and space for renewables, for feeding into the grid, for becoming more flexible. Because basically we're working in a different environment now, where energy demands are different. We need to be more adaptable, and we found, in fact, that quite a lot of our manufacturers are taking those steps to reduce their energy consumption, to become more adaptable, more creative. And those are the kind of things that we need to look to address so that we remain competitive and we remain agile.
And Philippa, I understand that the manufacturing circle has engaged with the policy makers. You've handed in the suggested points there. So how long before we get their responses to the blueprint plan?
We were very fortunate to have Minister Davies address us at our launch, and he has indicated support for the process in terms of engagement that is required, because it's a collaborative effort between different government departments within the policy making space, within industry as well, to understand and identify opportunities in value chains, and also with labour. So what we have advocated are various practical implementable steps, and it's really a case now of planning towards the new year to set up what are those priorities in terms of skills, for example, fiscal policy, trade policy, local procurement. Those are 4 areas that we could look at, and we're looking at setting up working groups with the right stakeholders in the room from all key sectors, and what needs to be done so that we can start actioning implementable steps and hopefully get towards that ambitious target, or starting on the way.
No, it needs to happen. Our unemployment rate definitely needs to come down. But Philippa, thanks for the insights, and we'll catch up with you as the developments unfold. That was Philippa Rodseth, who's the Executive Director at the Manufacturing Circle.